Again, welcome everyone. As Trudy mentioned, my name is Catherine Pons, and as we're talking about caregiving this afternoon, I take this very personally because I've been in the shoes that many of you are in now. My mom passed away a year ago after several years where myself and my siblings were involved in caring for her. My dad passed away about 10 years prior to that. And I have a sibling now who is disabled as a result of a stroke. So we are again involved in caregiving. So, as we're going through this afternoon, all the information I'll be sharing, a lot of this I have lived. So hopefully I'll be able to share some of my own personal experiences that you may find helpful. So as we are going to introduce you this afternoon to some pretty essential information, it may seem straightforward, but again, it is very important that you are able to engage in the planning process as you think about caregiving. Even if you've been caring for a loved one for a number of years already and have not yet engaged in some of the planning we'll address this afternoon, it's never too late. So it's important that you not feel that if you haven't taken care of some of these resources, taking advantage of some of these resources or taken care of some of what we cover in the booklet, don't feel that that ship has sailed. So before we get started, let me be very clear about this session. I am not a financial planner. I'm not an attorney. So what we're sharing with you this afternoon will be, again, guidance, if you will. And there, throughout this, as we go through everything, there will be places where I will encourage you to engage with financial professionals as well as legal professionals. That is important. So I will not be able to share, when it comes to question time, I will not be able to share with you any legal or financial advice. But what I think you may also find useful this afternoon is you may very well be able to begin formulating questions that you want to bring to your financial and legal advisors so that you are able to, again, be that much more focused, etc. Caregiving, a labor of love, and believe me, it is. And also believe me, there may be, and perhaps you're experiencing this, there may be many times a day where you have to remind yourself that it is indeed a labor of love because it's challenging, yet at the same time, it is a gift we are able to share with our loved ones. It's also important to think about what caregiving means. Some people see it as being the hands-on support for a loved one, where you may be feeding them, bathing them, etc. And you may not be considering that caregiving is also grocery shopping. Caregiving is taking your loved one to the doctor. Caregiving is making certain that, as appropriate, they're able to stay connected with family and friends. All of that is in part of what caregiving looks like. So we're going to, as we go through caregiving, the caregiving session this afternoon, as I mentioned, we are going to go through this workbook that we've shared with you and help you understand how to leverage it. We will also share with you additional resources as well. And a comment about resources. This is one of the advantages of AARP because resources are constantly expanding, resources are changing. So while we will be sharing in the workbook specific resources, it's important that you not feel that those are the only resources. So again, this is an active process. Let's start with a little brain tease, if you will. And for those of you who are virtual, you can simply type in A, B, or C into the chat section. But in 2021, on average, on average, how much did family caregivers spend on caregiving expenses, such as transportation and home modifications or any other caregiving expenses? What do you think? How much did family caregivers spend? $5,242, $7,242, $9,242.
You're getting B and C in the chat.
Okay, good. The answer is B. And again, this is on average, and this is what caregivers spent out of pocket. This is not what your loved one would have spent. This is what caregivers spent. Here's another one for you. In 2017, how many hours did unpaid caregivers, unpaid, provide to adult loved ones? 340 million hours, 3.4 billion hours, or 34 billion hours? What do you think? A, B, or C? Lots of C's. Well, those of you who selected C, 34 billion hours, and this was just in 2017. That's how many hours unpaid caregivers provided to adult loved ones. And again, back to what I indicated earlier, when you think about what caregiving is, it's a lot. And oftentimes we don't even feel like we are putting that much time into what we are doing. Let me share a couple of statistics with you. According to AARP's report, Caregiving in the US, an estimated 48 million family caregivers in the United States provided the 34 billion hours. So this is not just an estimate. This was based upon a study conducted by AARP. So again, that's a pretty good estimate. So what does this mean? It all adds up to approximately $470 billion in unpaid care. So again, this does not include when your loved ones are receiving long-term care based upon insurance that they have or you may have for them. This is simply unpaid care, $470 billion. And again, we share this information with you for you to understand the weight of all that you do collectively. So here are some examples of what those expenses look like when broken down by category. And if you look at the largest percentage, 52%, household expenses, significant. Recreation, education, legal, and other expenses, 6%. Oftentimes we think legal has to be a very significant percentage. But there's another percentage I'd like you to take a look at. Take a look at caregiver personal expenses, travel, respite care. We don't think about, especially these days when you look at the cost of gas, we don't think about what that cost looks like oftentimes, but 15% applies to caregiver personal expenses. How do we manage this? How do we manage this? And I can tell you from personal experience, you don't notice this. When I think about, my mom, for example, where we would do, and fortunately I have a number of siblings, so it was not all on my shoulders, but I never thought about what it took for me to do her grocery shopping and then travel to the other side of town to spend time with her, to drop off her groceries, etc. You just don't think about it. But there are also times where you are digging into your retirement savings in order to manage these expenses. About 1 in 10 have taken out a loan just to care for their loved ones. And think about what this does to your financial needs, particularly for those of us who are moving ever closer toward retirement. And to that point, nearly 1 in 5 reduce the amount they are saving for retirement, all to cover the needs of their loved ones. And this is why the workbook that we have for you today has been designed to help you engage in a very systematic planning process so that you're able to optimize your resources as well as the resources of your loved ones. So again, here you can see what some of and what many caregivers are doing in order to manage these expenses. I'm speaking in terms of expenses caregivers incur themselves to manage the just basics of caring for their loved one, but also you have to think about the costs of caring for your loved one, whether it's bringing someone in on a daily basis, weekly basis, etc. What I pay particular attention to, particularly given my expertise around careers and employment and so forth, is that third point here. More than half of caregivers have either quit their job or have reduced working hours, which naturally has a direct impact on their retirement. I mean, I was very fortunate in that I just so happened, coincidentally, to have changed jobs before my mom became ill. And I joined a company that A, was virtual, and B, small, and C, where we were able to manage our time based upon our own needs. As long as my objectives were met, etc., I had the flexibility of being able to be where I needed to be for my mom without worrying about having to take off work or use a limited amount of vacation, but that's oftentimes not the case. So as we look at the financial workbook, and again, this is a gold mine of information, notice the first page of the guide says it all. Dear family caregiver. It's designed to help you during the journey of caregiving. And again, we recognize the love you're bringing to what you do, but we also recognize the toll caregiving can take. So we've developed this set of tools to help you so you're not having to scratch your head and figure it out all on your own. So a few points to be mindful of here. First, the cost of caregiving is high. Most families, I've given you the billion and trillion dollar numbers, but individually, most families can spend close to $8,000 per year caring for a loved one. Second, caregiving, every caregiving journey is unique. My experience will be different from your experiences, will be different from experiences of other friends and families you may have. So again, what we will do is we will be hitting the highlights of some of the important topics you need to consider. And finally, caregiving is obviously a sensitive subject, but we also know that caregiving, regardless of your circumstances, can be very challenging, both physically and mentally. And I'm sure many of you've heard this before, but you have to take care of yourself. So you will see that throughout the workbook, there will be pages that will be pulling information about you, the caregiver, as well as gathering information about your loved one. So there are 4 areas we're going to focus on today: health, housing, money, and future. And again, this is indeed a workbook. So you will have the opportunity, not so much now, but to go through and gather information and complete as much of this workbook as you can, because after you've completed the guide, it can be a critical resource to equip someone to step in should you no longer be able to serve as a caregiver. It also helps you gather information about yourself so that should you become disabled in some way, your wants and desires and situation is covered. So just to repeat, this workbook is not designed to replace professionals such as attorneys and financial planners, but rather it's designed to help you so that you're able to go through and gather information that's going to be future focused. So first up, let's take a quick look at the health section of the guide. And we're going to begin documenting plans for the healthcare of your loved ones. So before you begin filling out each of these sections, it's important that you gather key information before you do so. And something else you can do is just review what's, again, with it, each of these sections so that you know if there is specific information that you indeed lack. A healthcare plan. Again, I'm sure many of you are thinking this is a no-brainer in terms of the information you need, but you would be surprised how many people have gaps in the information that they have about their loved ones or even about themselves. So again, what you want to do is make sure that you not only have contact information, that you have the health status of your loved one and yourself for that matter, but it's not enough just to say you have healthcare insurance, because obviously today everyone has some form of healthcare insurance, but you need to learn more about what that insurance is. Who is the insurance? Understand the complexities of Medicare. And certainly here at AARP, we have a vast array of resources, particularly with Medicare, to help you understand the intricacies of it. But you also need to understand about caps, copays, deductibles, etc. And that's something that I mentioned. I have a sibling who had a stroke, healthy, hale and hearty, and then one day he had a stroke. So we had to scramble to gather this information versus all of us sitting down and gathering information about ourselves in advance. So on the next page, you want to list health issues, medications, any accommodations that you may need. And again, this is useful because when you meet with your doctor, you take your loved one to the doctor for a doctor's appointment. It's important that you have this information close at hand because not every physician is going to have all of that information at their fingertips. In terms of your healthcare team, what are the preferred pharmacies, as well as hospitals, et cetera, and other providers? Does your loved one receive their medication in the mail? And again, have you determined if that's the most efficient way for the individual to receive that medication, for example? You also want to think about other members of that healthcare team. This is ideally not a task where you have to go it alone. You may not have a large number of siblings, for example, but that does not mean that there are not others who can be a part of that caregiving team. There may be people, if you're involved with a faith-based church or organization or a fraternal organization, et cetera, there may be those individuals who are able to help support you through caring for your loved one. And again, as I mentioned there at the conclusion of the workbook, there are a wide array of resources there as well, so that you're able to learn about local resources. I mentioned briefly earlier respite care. Respite care, again, is when you, the caregiver, are able to step away not leaving your loved one all on their own, but where you can make appropriate arrangements to have someone step in for you so that you can step back, relax, gather yourself, if you will, so that you're able to bring your best to your caregiving. You also may want to have a loved one participate in adult daycare if they are able. Because again, that's another way that your loved one has the opportunity to interact with others besides family, for example, but it gives you an opportunity to work, to attend to your own family, and again, can indeed be a very viable resource for both you and your loved one. Let's talk a moment about power of attorney. This is one of those examples where it is critical that you work closely with a legal expert. You know, again, there is a page here in the workbook where we discuss power of attorney, what it is, the kind of information that you need. However, this is not where you go it alone and say, well, I've laid it all out, but rather that you lay it all out and then consult with a legal professional about power of attorney. And keep in mind, there are different types of power of attorney. There's a healthcare power of attorney. There's a financial power of attorney. And you may think that there's a family member who would be perfect for the financial power of attorney. Don't assume that that individual will be prepared to take that on. So this oftentimes can require quite a discussion with not only immediate family members, but family, friends, etc., to determine who has the knowledge and expertise and who has the willingness to serve as power of attorney. When we look at power of attorney, you want to, again, have this in place, not only for your loved one, but for yourself. Because should you become disabled, not enabled, disabled, who will then be able to step in and care for your loved one if you do not have a power of attorney in place? So as I hope you are getting a sense as to how critical this information is and why we have that balance between what you need to represent you as well as what you need to represent your loved one. You also want to think about where you keep that power of attorney. This is not something you stick in your desk drawer so that when you have a need for it, you're rummaging around and saying, where did I put that thing? But rather, you need to put it in a safe place. And then you need to make certain that other people know where that safe place is. Because if you need that healthcare power of attorney, you need to be able, you or someone needs to be able to put their hands on it right away. And I can tell you from experience, when you're at the hospital, they're going to ask you 50 million times about power of attorney. And again, it doesn't mean that if there's not some type of catastrophic illness that you can't back into that power of attorney. That's what we had to do in that one situation. But the more prepared you can be, the better. Along those same lines, we're also looking at will and estate planning. Many of us are more familiar with this process than the power of attorney. So as I mentioned with power of attorney, it's not just who has the skill, but who has the willingness to take this on. And think about what else they're doing. And just to share with you a quick personal example, when my mom was ill, she had two younger sisters who were reasonably decent health. Well, turns out they predeceased my mother. And one of them named my sister as the executor of her will. Then about 9 months later, my mom died, and my mom had named the same sibling as my sister as the executor of her will. So now she's executor of 2 estates. Now, it just so happens that she can manage it, but what if she couldn't? So that's what an example of where that communication becomes very important. There are some who think as long as you write down your wishes in terms of a will, that is a legally binding document. No, you do want to have it notarized, just as you need to have that power of attorney notarized. And again, legal advice is so important. And it's not that your wishes aren't important, but there may be more expedient ways, for example, for you to dispose of a family home. You may think, well, I'm going to leave this to all of my children, all of my grown adult children, 3 of whom may live in a different state. And now you may have infighting about, well, what do we do with the home? Oh, I don't want to sell it for sentimental purposes, or I do want to sell it because I need the money, etc. Again, an attorney may have a more expedient way, for example, for you to manage disposal of real estate, as an example. You also want to make certain that you don't overlook certain assets that you may possess as well. And this is the one that I found very important. Who will be financially impacted by your death? For example, there are times where grandparents will be disposing of their resources while they're living, and may be paying college tuition, for example, for some of their grandchildren. Well, do you know that? By putting it in a will and having your loved one and yourself, obviously, be very specific about how that college tuition, what their vision is for that college tuition, that grandchild may be left high and dry if it's not addressed. Okay, so do you see where we're going here? And again, what I love about the workbook is that the questions are very specific, so that you're able to think about what's the information I have, what's the information that I need. Okay. Now we're going to switch. There's one other topic. And I think I just subconsciously was setting this aside because this is one of the more difficult topics. Internment options and plans. We all know we're going to die. I mean, that's the one fact of life once we're born. But oftentimes we don't like to think about the planning of that process. And it's not at all unusual for family members to be sitting there scratching their heads after their loved one has died and saying, well, I wonder if they really want it to be buried. Because I can assure you, burial costs are through the roof. Well, your loved one may have been very keen on being buried, and you're thinking, well, we just don't have the money, so we're just going to cremate them. So these are the things you want to think about. Memorial service. What do you want? Do you want to have a memorial service or a funeral mass, or whatever your religious affiliation is? What is it that you want to have? And are there any special aspects of the ceremony and the service that you want to be addressed? And then looking at your life insurance, because from personal experience, you'll go to the funeral home and the first question they have is, well, how much life insurance did they have? Well, no. Let's talk about the range of costs that you have. And with your knowing what that life insurance is, then you can make certain that you're not being sold an array of services based upon the size of that life insurance policy. Yeah. So, and again, and trust me, it happens. And it's not that people are greedy, that's the business they're in. And it's about, it's a business that is about generating revenue. So all of these you want to gather. And when you have siblings and children, etc., you want to make certain that you're engaging in this process together. So you are getting input from everyone before the fact. Before the fact. So let's take a moment and talk about housing. And as we look at housing, again, we're talking about life at home, transportation, diet, whether individuals have allergies and things of that nature that have to be covered. So again, some of the information that you need here is not unexpected. Again, for yourself, for your loved one. If they have a mortgage, what is that? If they rent, what is that? What's the term of that lease? Again, what's their home insurance information as well as property tax? Many, many elderly people have lost their homes because a family member wasn't aware that they were not paying the property tax. It could be a home that they've owned for decades. So this is the time to gather the information. Utility companies are important, and I'll revisit taxes in a moment, because there are times where the utility companies will average your bills out so that, again, when we have that -5-degree day in January, that gas bill is not going through the roof, but where they will average out your monthly bills. Also with property tax information, I know, for example, in the District of Columbia, there is a rebate for senior citizens, and it is quite substantial. So these are the sorts of, this is the kind of information you need so that you can determine, are there advantages for elderly and senior citizens, and even you? Because I was quite surprised about the property tax. I didn't think I was old enough, but turned out I was, with significant savings. Transportation is another one. And I'll make a plug here for staying attentive to your loved ones and determining when it's the right time to take the keys, because the last thing any of us would want is for a loved one to get lost while driving because they have some form of dementia, nor be in an accident, or their health to be so frail that they suffer some type of medical event while driving. So you do need to think about the appropriate time to take the keys. But assuming that they are able to drive, again, you need to know when their driver's license is up for renewal. And what is required to renew that driver's license. Vehicle insurance, again, do they own their vehicle? Is it leased, etc.? Do they have a title? Can you put your hands on the title? Because again, assuming that at some point your loved one has passed and you're sitting there with their vehicle, if you don't have the title, it can become quite complicated to get another copy. It can be done, obviously, especially when you've already put the power of attorney in place. But again, if you know that in the safety deposit box or safe that the title to the vehicle is there, makes it a heck of a lot easier, for example, to simply sell the vehicle, should you so wish. Vehicle registration is another one where you want to make certain that it's taken care of, but also determine if there are any types of discounts in your state for these types of fees when you're above a certain age. You also want to think about, if your loved one does not own a vehicle, are there other modes of transportation that are important? So for example, in this local area, DC, Maryland, and Virginia, you have metro access. Determine what that cost is, even if it's not something your loved one immediately needs, so that you're able to take advantage of those. Special diets and allergies. And let me just step back a moment. I want you to think about how you may have incurred costs as a result, out of pocket costs, as a result of some of these matters just cropping up out of the blue, and what a difference it can make if you're able to plan in advance. So you want to think about any special dietary needs. And this is important if you have someone coming in to care for your loved one. You may have someone who is a homemaker, if you will, who comes in and a few days a week, who will clean and who will cook and engage in light housekeeping. Well, if you're not able to convey to them food allergies or again, any special dietary needs, that may be a problem, and it may adversely impact the health of your loved one. We refer here to EpiPens. And again, if you've ever had allergies, you know how critical it is not only to have the EpiPen, but to have it in a safe place and to make certain the appropriate people know where it is 24/7. And so what you're doing here is you're gathering all of this. I mentioned earlier a safe or a safe deposit box. It's not a bad idea to have a safe in your home. And again, make sure that you are not the only one who knows how to access the contents of that safe. But this is a checklist that you may find useful when you think about the kinds of resources to use. It needs to be fireproof, and it needs to be accessible. And then, of course, there's a safe deposit box as well at banks that can be useful. You also want to keep other information in your filing cabinet. And the comment here, when you organize your file cabinet, don't just organize it for yourself. Organize it so someone else can come in and find documents. So don't use an overly complicated filing system when you are setting up these types of files. It should be very obvious, very straightforward, so that anyone can come in and immediately put their hands on these documents. Money. This is right up there with funeral expenses, et cetera, when it comes to sensitivity of discussing this topic. And let me hasten to say, it's a topic that must be discussed. It must be discussed with your loved ones. But don't just say, all right, Mom, we're going to talk about money. You have to make certain that your loved one is prepared to discuss their personal finances. Doesn't mean you put it off forever, but you let them know that it's something you need to discuss, and you agree upon a time to do so. So this whole section that we have here, again, is going to be pretty straightforward about your monthly budget, because again, you would be amazed, even personally, when you get beyond the numbers we shared early on, but those out-of-pocket expenses. So what is your monthly budget? What are your caregiving costs in your caregiving budget? And then the same for your loved one in terms of their budget. Investments. What do your loved ones have? It's very easy to forget about that. Oh yeah, there's that IRA I opened 35 years ago. Pull it all together, because I mean, it's nice to fund the state, but if you do not retrieve these funds, eventually they go to the state. And it's called escheated estates. And perhaps you've seen those lists in the Washington Post where they list the individuals who are owed money, and if you don't collect the money, it goes away. Debt is another sensitive topic within the topic of money, but you need to make certain that you have a plan for reducing your debt And if your loved ones have debt, you need to be prepared to plan for ways in which you will reduce that debt. The last section here is about the future. And what you want to think about is what's going to be important to you as a caregiver. What's going to be important to you as an individual with your family. So, because this is all a whole, if you will. It can't just be about your loved one. It can't just be about you. It's about all of you. And thinking about the future will help you determine how those pieces fit together. I referenced earlier a few times resources. There is in the book, again, a broad array of resources that are listed. Again, stay on top of this because these resources do evolve and change. And fortunately, there are more and more resources available. And the AARP is very good at keeping their website updated with resources. So please do use that as a resource. And it's organized in a way that information is readily accessible. So again, you can see here, we have everything from these types of caregiving resources. There's a wonderful manual called Prepare to Care that includes a planning guide, even the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. This is not an easy process. It's not an easy process. I often feel caregivers are walking around with a little halo on above their heads or angel's wings or something, because it really is truly a labor of love. But you have to remember that you are not having to go it alone. So please use this resource, take advantage of it, and again, leverage the resources that are listed in the workbook.